Do you know that a fundamental part of the human body, an organ dedicated entirely to pleasure, was not fully anatomically mapped by medical science until the early 2000s? It sounds like a dystopian medical thriller, but it is just the stark reality of human anatomy. This glaring, almost unbelievable blind spot perfectly captures everything wrong with how we are taught to understand our own bodies, our hidden desires, and the intricate dynamics of our intimate relationships. We are, quite literally, operating in the dark with an incomplete map and wondering why we keep getting lost. That is exactly the bold premise of this book, written by Dr. Nicole McNichols, a celebrated psychology professor who teaches the most sought-after human sexuality class at the University of Washington. McNichols has spent years looking closely at the data, analyzing the unspoken resentments, and studying the quiet, frustrated bedrooms of thousands of ordinary people. This book is absolutely not a mechanical manual of acrobatic positions or a cheap list of spicy tricks to try on a Friday night to save a dying spark. It is a profound, deeply researched deconstruction of why long-term couples inevitably lose their momentum, how invisible pressure quietly kills desire, and why establishing a true emotional connection is the actual main event. Imagine an ordinary woman who has spent her entire day intensely managing the invisible mental load of her busy household, skillfully navigating toxic workplace politics, and constantly putting out small fires for everyone around her. When her well-meaning partner approaches her for intimacy at the very end of the day, she does not feel a magical, spontaneous spark of desire. She feels completely touched out, emotionally drained, and physically exhausted. McNichols explains brilliantly that in these very common moments, desire only shows up after the context is made exactly right. It is like a slow-burning ember in a fireplace that desperately needs the right kind of steady oxygen to ignite into a flame. The author makes the crucial point that true foreplay does not begin a mere 5 minutes before the main event. It begins early in the morning, when a partner actively shares the heavy household burdens or listens intently to a work frustration without constantly trying to fix the problem. Feeling genuinely seen, deeply heard, and truly wanted, without the looming heavy threat of an obligatory physical transaction, is the ultimate romantic fantasy for many exhausted, overworked adults. McNichols completely shatters the damaging misconception that a lack of spontaneous, immediate arousal means something is permanently broken in the person or the relationship. She normalizes the absolute need for a long runway, explaining clearly that penetrative acts are rarely the main event for most women anyway. A fact that ties perfectly back to that staggering historical ignorance surrounding female anatomy mentioned earlier. Think about the classic advice typically given to busy couples whose intimate lives have flatlined over the years. You have probably heard the well-meaning couples therapist or the glossy magazine article confidently tell you to simply schedule it. They tell you to put it on the calendar right between picking up groceries on Tuesday and doing laundry on Thursday. MC Nichols completely dismantles this clinical, joyless approach with surgical precision. She presents the very relatable, very real scenario of a tired couple who decides that Thursday night at exactly 9 is their officially designated time for intimacy. Thursday finally rolls around. One partner is entirely exhausted from a grueling, soul-crushing day at the office, and the other partner is sitting there, hyper-aware of the ticking clock on the nightstand. The scheduled time instantly transforms what should be a spontaneous expression of love into a high-stakes performance review. It creates a suffocating environment built entirely on pressure and rigid expectation. When the exhausted partner inevitably asks for a rain check to get some sleep, the toxic initiation and rejection cycle officially begins. The rejected partner feels fundamentally unloved and completely unwanted, while the rejecting partner feels utterly suffocated and burdened by guilt. Resentment begins to build quietly like a slow, dangerous leak in a tire, completely destroying the foundation of the relationship. Instead of this disastrous, business-like calendar method, McNichols introduces the liberating concept of intimacy dates. These are designated, protected times to connect with your partner without any underlying agenda or expected physical outcome looming over the evening. It is about actively stripping away the immense pressure of performance and replacing it with genuine, open-ended curiosity. The author demonstrates beautifully how a simple, deliberate shift from trying to check a physical box to genuinely trying to understand your partner can permanently thaw years of built-up emotional ice. When the heavy pressure to perform is completely removed from the room, the necessary space for actual breathing desire is finally created. We are constantly fed a very specific, highly fictionalized narrative by pop culture about how physical attraction is supposed to work in the real world. The cinematic ideal is always spontaneous desire, where two beautiful people lock eyes across a crowded room and are instantly overwhelmed by an uncontrollable, burning urge to rip their clothes off right there. Another major, deeply emotional anchor in this phenomenal book is the heavy, invisible baggage of cultural shame. MC Nichols takes us straight into the conflicted minds of individuals who genuinely deeply love their long-term partners, but still completely freeze up when it comes to any form of physical intimacy. The author meticulously traces this painful hesitation back to its deep psychological roots, revealing that sexual shame is almost always a learned behavior, often ingrained during vulnerable childhood years through fear-based education or overarching cultural stigma. People do not just magically leave their lifetime of childhood conditioning at the bedroom door when they get married. McNichols describes the truly tragic reality of grown adults who still actively carry the heavy subconscious belief that their natural desires are somehow fundamentally wrong or inherently dirty. She provides a vivid, eye-opening look at how progressive countries with comprehensive, pleasure-positive education programs yield dramatically better, healthier outcomes in adult relationships and general public health. In stark contrast, the highly restrictive, shame-based models prevalent in many modern societies create a lasting legacy of painful silence and endless confusion. A person might subconsciously pull away from a loving partner touching their shoulder, not because of any lack of physical attraction, but because an unexamined, decades-old guilt is sitting right there in the bed next to them. The book provides a wonderfully compassionate, step-by-step roadmap for having these incredibly difficult, highly vulnerable conversations with the clothes fully on. McNichols emphasizes repeatedly that identifying and naming these inherited toxic sources of shame is the absolute prerequisite for building healthier, lasting intimacy. It requires a tremendous amount of emotional vulnerability to look at a partner and tell them that you are currently fighting invisible ghosts from your religious or cultural past, rather than rejecting their love in the present moment. Every thorough deep dive requires a moment of totally honest reflection on exactly what a book achieves and where it occasionally falls short of its lofty promises. McNichols absolutely excels in her deeply compassionate, heavily science-backed approach to a very sensitive topic. Her writing tone is deeply reassuring, like a trusted friend who happens to be a brilliant scientist. She expertly removes the clinical, sterile coldness from complex psychological research and presents the hard data with a wonderfully gender-inclusive, pleasure-forward perspective that feels incredibly modern and urgently necessary. The specific chapters focusing on the toxic initiation and rejection cycle are nothing short of revelatory. They will undoubtedly save countless marriages by giving struggling couples the exact, precise vocabulary they desperately need to articulate their quiet, simmering resentments. However, the book does have its slight, noticeable stumbles along the way. If you are an avid, dedicated consumer of relationship psychology and have already thoroughly read the groundbreaking works of researchers like John Gottman or Emily Nagoski, some of the core foundational concepts regarding responsive desire and emotional connection will definitely feel like very familiar territory. While McNichols brings her own unique, highly engaging classroom anecdotes and fresh case studies to the table, the foundational science overlaps significantly with the existing popular literature on the subject. Additionally, while the book strongly promises a broad, inclusive look at ethical non-monogamy and alternative kink lifestyles, the true emotional center of gravity, remains heavily, unmistakably anchored in the daily struggles of long-term, monogamous, heterosexual couples navigating the treacherous waters of domestic exhaustion. The sections specifically exploring life outside that one specific dynamic, while always respectful and highly inclusive in language, can occasionally feel a bit rushed and slightly superficial compared to the incredibly deep, richly textured analysis of marital drift and bedroom boredom. Despite these relatively minor structural critiques, the final verdict on this work is overwhelmingly, unequivocally positive. You Could Be Having Better Sex is an absolutely essential, mandatory read for anyone who has ever felt broken, perpetually exhausted, or deeply confused by the shifting nature of their own physical desires. It is highly, passionately recommended for distant couples who feel like they are currently living as polite roommates. And it is equally vital for single individuals who desperately want to unlearn the toxic limiting shame they inherited from a deeply flawed culture. It is so much more than just a simple guidebook about physical intimacy. It is a profound, beautifully written masterclass in human empathy, open communication, and the vital importance of emotional connection. It powerfully teaches us that truly great, lasting relationships do not just accidentally drift into great, fulfilling intimacy. They build it highly intentionally with immense courage, deep vulnerability, and relentless, loving curiosity. If you found this deep dive breakdown helpful for your own journey, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It encourages us to make more videos you will surely love of interesting books we've read.